So, hello everybody for the second session of this afternoon. Those who don't have their headsets on, I strongly recommend to do so because the noise is still on a high level. Anyway, because I've seen that you haven't had your headphones on, you missed the advantage to hear some lovely jazz in the afternoon. And a jazz with a coffee would have been better, but anyway, I think Sandra will make you an offer afterwards you can't resist. Anyway, Sandra from Tico, just in front of the scene, will talk about the role of the aggregator. Heartily welcome, and the floor is yours. And tell us what you have to say. Here is the mic. And if you would like this one as well, you can take it.
So thank you very much. I hope you can hear me all. Good, great, because at the other one we had some issues. So welcome everyone. I'm now the second last person between you and some drinks or coffee. And I'm going to talk about the, on one side, the role of the aggregator, because we are a technology company providing this kind of technology to be an aggregator, but also about innovative ways to create value for the consumer and how to unlock consumer flexibility. Because the major topic was how to incentivize the consumer. So our company, Tico Energy Solutions, is a technology provider which offers a platform where you can connect any kind of residential assets on it. And then you have two value propositions on it. On one side, you can use the flexibility of these assets for VPP services, so any kind of energy, grid products like intraday, day-ahead frequency regulation, local grid optimization. And on the other side, we offer a home energy management system. We are based in Switzerland. Our booth you will find just behind you, and there comes already my offer. After the second speaker, you are more than welcome to join at our booth. We have a nice coffee machine there, printing your own selfie picture on the coffee. So, also new to me. But now coming back to the topic, how to incentivize the customer, because potentially some of you might be my future customer, so I incentivize you with a coffee. Why do I do that? There is no right way, but there are many ways to unlock consumer flexibility. And out of our own role and our own position, we had to learn how to convince a household to join a virtual power plant platform. And I can tell you it took us quite some time to crack that nut. Depending on the culture, the geography where you are dealing in, there are different possibilities to incentivize the customer. And I just give you a few examples. The topic of money. This is the easiest, right? You say, well, you know, you give me some extra money and I'm happy to give you my flexibility. This is pretty well known in the commercial and industrial space, right? If I'm an industrial company, paper producing company, and I give my flexibility, for example, to Ananok, I just want to see money for it. That's easy. If you want to do that on a household level, you might get the challenge that the flexibility that you get out of one household is pretty small. So if I would do that tomorrow, it might be enough in 1 month that you can buy yourself a coffee. This is not really convincing. But instead, I have to find either additional functionality that I can give to the household, additional value that I can create for you, or I have to match a consumer, your need, to make you as open as possible to join a virtual power plant service. So what are the main factors which influence consumers' choice? And if I talk about the consumer in this way, I really mean the end consumer. It's the household. And there are many different, let's say, structures. You find a lot of information about that in the internet, but we see three major areas. So the first of all is you as an individual. It's how old you are. It's the motivation that you have, how you have been growing up, what are your beliefs and attitudes. It's also about your personal setup. Are you single? Are you a family? Are you living in a flat? Are you living in a single home? It's your lifestyle. Are you working like crazy, like all of us, just going back and forth, working every day, or are you taking a bit more relaxed? And then as a third part, what are the social trends? And there are the social trends which you all know. It's about the sharing economy. It's about local consumption. It's also the digitalization in the technology space which is moving on. It's also the culture you are living in. And all of this will influence your choice and your decision if you are going to join a virtual power plant and what I need to give to you that you will do that. I show you here one example where we solved a need for the customer. So instead of giving him the money to join our virtual power plant in Switzerland, we went to the customer's home and we said, we would like to connect your heat pump to our virtual power plant. What do I have to give to you as an individual? The customer said, well, I don't think there is a real need or anything. And then we observed these customers, and I did it myself. So I joined the heat pump company with an installer, and I said, well, you know, I belong to that company, and I want to offer you a new service. And then we tried. We really make trials, and we said, so how do you use your heat pump? Well, you know, the installer puts it in place, and then it's running 24/7, and as long as it's running, I don't care. Well, okay. But then what happens if you go on holidays? Well, it still keeps on running and running and running. And we said, yeah, but why don't you reduce your consumption when you are on holidays? It's easy savings that you can make. And then there are two ways normally for the consumer today. Either you go to each of the heating elements itself and you turn them down. How many people are doing that if you're going on holidays? How many of you turn it down? Not so many. How many of you would go in the basement to that huge installation and click on the button with there is normally a little sun or a car or palm tree showing you this is the button for your holidays? At least one. Not too bad. If I would ask my mother to do that, she tells me like, oh no, Sandra, I'm not going to touch that. And she really has a heat pump at home. She says like, no, 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 no. If I press something wrong, then probably my house gets cold, or I'm not sure if I can get it on again. I will not touch that big thing. And interestingly, and this was new to us, some people are afraid. They are afraid of their heating system. So we asked them, what would happen if we give you an app where you can remotely control your heat pump in an easy way just by saying, I will go on holidays for 1 week of skiing, for example, and I want to reduce my consumption by half during that time. And then you will immediately see how the consumption goes down. And if you feel uncomfortable, then you can already bring it up, even on your way back home if you're sitting in the car. And this is what we have solved with this app. So the customer sees his consumption. Right now we are also connecting batteries, PV systems, etc., so solar systems. So he also sees his production. He can monitor what's happening in the home. And he has the eco mode, which is here in the middle. You see the calendar, where he can easily say, from today, in 5 days from now, I'm leaving, I want to reduce, and he will see it in his consumption data. And there was a last point, because normally, you know, heating systems, I stick with that example, are quite reliable, right? They normally never break down. But I can tell you, if they break down, normally you are at work, you come back home in the evening, and either it's your kids or yourself who detect the water is getting a bit cold in the shower. So what happened? And then it's the heating system which created a failure. So normally you only detect it when it's already, let's say, too late. So instead, what you can do, you can monitor the consumption of that system, and then you can send a really simple alarm to the user and tell him, you know, your system has a problem. And I'm not sure if one of you is from a device supplier, probably not from a heat pump supplier. Some of these new heat pumps have this functionality already with the alarming system. But there are thousands and thousands of heating systems out there who don't have that yet, and where the customers have been really thankful to have that functionality and to be able to call the installer in the right moment. And then I take you one step further, going a bit away from only the heating system. If you have a consumer who has not only heating, but who has a solar system and a battery in place, all of these systems offer you already this self-consumption possibility between the solar and the battery. I give you the example of Switzerland. Normally, just with solar panels, you have a self-consumption rate of around 30%. Together with the battery, you can increase it, if you're lucky, to 70%, if you overinvest, probably to 80%. Many of these customers have one really simple device in the home, which is the water tank, which you can use almost like a battery. It's normally heated during the night. But what you can do, you can shift the heating up of the water also during the day when there is excessive solar energy. And it increases the self-consumption by additional 15%. Without a huge investment in a battery, by just using what you already have in the home. And you can not only use the water tank, but you can also use the heat pump heating. And in other countries, for example, like Australia, we do that with the pool pumps. And by this, you bring additional value to the end customer. You increase his self-consumption, and you do not even have to give him money for that. He's already happy with that additional value or additional functionality. So this is from a technology perspective. But then, how does it look as a business model, right? How does it work? And I will show you a few examples now. I think most of the names you know. One of them is us ourselves in Switzerland. One interesting example is Direct Energy in France. What they are doing, they use this app for their electrical heating customers. And there the purpose is to increase the energy efficiency of this customer and to allow him to make savings. And even though he's paying a small little monthly fee in addition to his normal tariff for that product, he's happy to take it because you bring him the additional value of making savings, which he values higher than the additional payment he has to do. The other one is, and I take the second one, is Sonnen, which you all know, with a Sonnen flat rate tariff. Also, it sounds really commercial. In the end, Sonnen is giving the customer 3 kilowatt hours. Yes, for sure, there's some financial flow behind. But what they do, they bring all the Sonnen flat rate batteries on the frequency regulation market. They take the revenue, which they get from the transmission grid operator, and instead of giving it as a financial revenue to the end customer, they say, you get 3 kilowatt hours. And the same actually is happening with EWE in Germany, who's exactly going in the same direction. And then we have EVN, which is a local company here from Austria, who's going more into the direction of the e-mobility charging, where it's a model where you can connect your e-car and your e-charging station to the distribution grid operator, and then you will get some advantages out of that in terms also 3 kilowatt hours, for example. So just to show you a few examples. And what makes these examples possible? Not only the additional value that you give or the additional functionality, but if you think about the end consumer, there are two important points. It's also about the communication. We are all people who work in that energy industry, often for many years. We know all these buzzwords like virtual power plant and flexibility and frequency markets and shift, peak shaving and all of that. Have you ever tried to talk to your neighbor at home and ask him if he knows what a virtual power plant is? It's getting difficult. Some people at least have an idea. What's important is that you adjust your communication to the specific customer segment. And also there I can give you an example. We have been working with a night storage manufacturer. So it's these huge heating systems that heat up during the night and release the heat during the day. And normally you find these assets in homes which have been built probably 50, 60 years ago. And sometimes even the people who have built the house are still living in that house, which means they are really old, really, really old. If you talk about these people with virtual power plant, it's like, no, 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 something new, I cannot touch that, right? I don't want to hear that, I'm fine with my heating system. On that way, you will never be able to convince them. Or also if you give them an app or website here, you can register, you just have to click here. These people, I mean, it's like my grandma, this will never work. But they are used to communicate on paper, and I know we do not like this word in a digitalized world, but this customer segment prefers to communicate with us on paper. And yes, they register, for example, for Tico via paper. They sign, they put it into an envelope and send it back. This is just one example. If I give you more the example of the prosumer, a person who has a solar panel on the roof, who has a battery in the basement, for sure these people are normally used to deal over the internet, right? We are all used also to do the online banking, etc. Then it's fine if you say just sign up via internet or register here and take the app and the website. That's perfectly fine. And you can also talk with them in different languages. And then the second important part is how you organize the process. Because when we see on how to unlock the flexibility, yes, you have an attractive offer, yes, you have communicated in the right way, always keep in mind, make it as simple as possible for the end user. Not for you, but for the end user. And this is again the example of the older generation. For them, it's the easiest to write everything down, put it into an envelope and bring it to the mail. For other generations, it's better to do everything online, but then make the transition as smooth as possible and as easy as possible to sign up. And there, people need also one important thing, the information. So always give them an opportunity to get somewhere help and additional information if needed in terms of call centers, etc. And yes, this has been implemented with all these companies I have shown you before. And this is based on our platform, on the Tico technology. And we have seen that it's central to unlock the flexibility to always think about two sides, about the consumer, about the value that you create for the consumer, which we call the energy management system for him. And then on the other side, on how you can then monetize the flexibility and give some of that value that you generate back to the consumer, either in terms of functionality or added value. And then I thank you very much. And if you have any further questions, we are literally just behind you, that big purple pink booth.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry. Thank you very much, Sandra. You already had your applause, so still to prevent that I have to go over there, are there some immediate questions? No? Anyway, then look at yourself here on the foam of your cappuccino and have a talk with her then afterwards. Yeah, that brings me to my next and also last speaker of this day, which is Loic Tillman of Elia Group. Sorry, it's a colleague over there I haven't seen for a long time. Surprised to see him. Hi, how are you? He will talk about settlement via blockchain. Settlement of flexibility, already a challenge, and then via blockchain, interesting issue. I'm very curious. Stage is yours.
Thank you. How can I, sorry, Joachim, for the presentation?
Sorry, forgot something. My colleague was
So,
first. Anyway, we have to get out of here. Then you're here. And here we are.
Perfect, thank you. So first, thank you for being there despite a nice invitation for a coffee just afterwards. So today, I will not talk about incentivization. I will talk about how blockchain can effectively have an added value in a decentralized energy world for prosumers, but for also system operators. But it will not solve all the challenges, and the collaboration between the different players will still remain the key of this decentralization. So I don't know how familiar you are with the blockchain technology, but I think this is kind of a mandatory slide when you start a presentation about blockchain. So what is blockchain? Well, it's not more than a decentralized database. So compared to a classical database, when you have everything that is centralized, all the data is validated and managed centrally with a central authority, in the blockchain, all the data are replicated in multiple data loggers. These data loggers could be everything. Could be your smartphone, your laptop, servers, but they have a replication of all the history of the data, which is making the blockchain very transparent because everybody has access to the data. Also, blockchain is very resilient because you cannot shut it down centrally. And when you are sending new data to the blockchain, they will be aggregated under a block. So it's a block, it's an aggregation of data of a certain size. And this size will be defined in the protocol layer of the blockchain, in the software layer if you want. And this will need to be validated by multiple validators called the nodes, which is bringing this trust. And on top of this data will be represented by a unique crypto code. So this is the address. It's a unique representation of what you have in your block. And this crypto code will be used in the next block, and so on, and so on, and so on, as an input data. Which means that if I make a transaction with you, for example, I send you 10 euro, but then in the future I want to change my transaction, I want to screw you, and I want to send you only 5 euro. Which means that I need to change this data for every node, but also for every blocks afterwards. So this is bringing immutability, that is bringing trust without a central authority. So that's also efficient. And another concept when you talk about blockchain that is very important is the smart contract. It's another buzzword to define something that is actually very, very simple. It's just based on the principle, if this, then that. So if there is a trigger, then there is an action. So it's bringing automation to the blockchain with the added value of the blockchain. So immutability, transparency, and security. And so let's take an example. If I want to buy a used car and all the data of the used car are encrypted on the blockchain, including the mileage, well, I will sign a transaction, which will be the trigger, and then the action will be that my money will be blocked on my bank account automatically. Then I receive the key to finalize the transfer of the ownership, for example. I introduce a code to finalize this. This will be the trigger. The action will be that my money will be automatically sent to the previous owner. So this is really bringing automation, and you have specific blockchain developed for that, like Ethereum. You might have heard about it. So now, according to different consulting companies, around 85% of the projects on blockchain do not actually need blockchain. So how can you know that your application is effectively making sense for blockchain? Well, first you need a database, of course. Then you need also to have independent writers that do not trust each other. If I'm sending you, as I said, if I want to send you 5 euro now, how can you be sure that I will do that? You know me, I don't know you, well, a bit now, but we will go to a bank and we need to pay the bank for this. In the blockchain, you do not need the bank. You will have a disintermediation, and this disintermediation will also need to lead to an economical benefit for your application. So let's just think about these different criteria. We have decentralization, disintermediation, new players, transaction. It's effectively resonating with what we are experiencing now with the energy sector, with the decentralization of the energy sector. So we are shifting from, everybody knows that we are shifting from a world that is big central generation centric towards a world that is prosumer centric. That's why we are all here. And that's why also we can think about a lot of application using blockchain for the energy sector. So like, for example, the charging of your electric car from different chargers, or also like you have here is Acciona, the use of blockchain for the traceability of your guarantee of origin, so really putting a green color on your megawatt hour. But the main share of the application so far have been around peer-to-peer trading and transactive energy. But for all these projects, and generally in the energy sector, there are different challenges for the adoption of blockchain. The first one is obviously the scalability. Everybody knows that Bitcoin transaction, even though now it's a bit better, well, it costs a lot or it takes a lot of time. On top of this, we are using more and more, as we have been presented with Tico, more and more IoT devices that do not have gigabytes of data storage for having all this data, all the legacy of the blockchain. So this is the first challenge. The second one, all knows that Bitcoin is consuming so much power. I think we talk about the consumption of Croatia or Ireland, for example. So it's massive. And using this technology is completely against the principle of the energy transition and the energy efficiency. And the last one is obviously confidentiality, because in the blockchain, everything is transparent, while in the energy sector, we have a lot of transactions that need to remain confidential. You don't want that everybody knows how much you are consuming and when you are consuming. So if you come back now to the application and you think about the system operators, well, as a system operators, so Elia, we have a lot of challenges, and the main one will be flexibility, especially in Belgium. By 2025, we'll have the nuclear phase out. We will have only 2.3 gigawatts of capacity of thermal existing capacity available, while the peak is at around 14 gigawatts. So we will have less and less centralized flexibility, and at the same time, we'll have a big uptake of renewables and also a complexification of the demand pattern due to electrification. So you have an increasing need of flexibility due to this intermittency, but also due to the uncertainty brought by the electrification. So you will need to get access to the decentralized flexibility. And when I talk about system operators, it's not only Elia. It will be also, of course, DSO for congestion management, voltage control, or even microgrid managers. 2 weeks ago in Belgium, they have adopted a rules to agree to have a legal entity as a microgrid manager. So we can have now in Belgium, at least in Wallonia, microgrid managers. And they will need also flexibility. But to get this flexibility, there will be a few challenges. The first one is obviously the regulation. We need to lower the barrier to put the prosumer at the center of the market. And we need also, as we have seen today, incentivize them. But the one that is more pragmatic for us is the operation and the administration. Because now in Belgium, we have around dozens of power plants to balance the grid. In the future, if we need this decentralized flexibility, we talk about hundreds, thousands, or millions of flexibility points. How can you manage that in terms of operation? How can you manage the settlement and the contract? And that's why we wanted to base our project on the management of the settlement of decentralized flexibility. So the goal of this project is to develop a solution, which is still be a test solution, for the management of the decentralized flexibility from the registration of the new players to the flexibility bid from its introduction to the final settlement of the penalties. We excluded somehow the activation. It means that the activation is now still manual. We don't have an IoT devices directly connected to the blockchain, but that might be a next step. And so for this project, we use an existing product called the Bid Ladder. It's a flexibility product targeting any kind of flexibility provider without any reservation, with a 45 minutes lead time and so on. We have simplified a bit the scope for the purpose of the project, but we also added some new concepts, like the possibility to manage the same flexibility point by different system operators. So we are partnering with 2 Belgian players on this project. The first one is Settlement, blockchain developers, but also Actility. They have a stand here, I don't know exactly where. And they are bringing this perspective for energy market players, because they are also flexibility providers in Belgium. And the goal will be to deploy our smart contract on the EWF blockchain. So they have a big stand here. EWF, it's a Energy Web Foundation. It's a non-profit organization that is aiming to accelerate the adoption of blockchain in the energy sector. So they have a community, a lot of different startups, notably that you can see also on the stand. And they have also developed their own blockchain only for the energy sector. And recently this year, they have unveiled some new cool features to tackle the challenges that we have just mentioned. For example, the scalability, they have developed a light node. So it's kind of an access point to the blockchain without having all the legacy of the blockchain. So you don't need gigabyte of data. You don't need to store them. At least you are able to deal with the blockchain, to connect with the blockchain. And so this will enable the use of smart meters, smart devices, and so on, directly connected to the blockchain. The second one is the energy consumption. They have adopted a proof of authority principle for the validation of data, which means that compared to Bitcoin, where everybody is competing to validate the data, which is consuming so much power because everybody is doing the same at the same time. Well, in the proof of authority concept, you have only one node that is entitled for the validation of the data at one time. So it's reducing drastically the energy consumption of the technology. And finally, for the confidentiality, they have put in place secret transaction that is enabling to make some transaction on the blockchain encrypted, so you cannot see what is behind. And so the goal of this project is the very first project for Elia with blockchain, so it's not that ambitious. It's first to understand what will be the added value of the technology and to validate some hypotheses, some business hypotheses, like, okay, can we effectively accelerate the settlement of the decentralized flexibility using blockchain? Putting us in the shoes of the TSO of the future that needs to tackle with 100,000 of decentralized flexibility. Can we have a decrease of the overhead in the future using blockchain? That's the question. Second one is, can we effectively use the same flexibility point with different system operators at the same time with the blockchain? And the last one is, can we ensure the confidentiality of the data? And so at the beginning of this project, we had a lot of discussion about the business requirements. The RFP was well defined, very detailed, but it was very important for our partners Settlement to really understand everything. But why? Because the smart contracts are very immutable. You cannot change them afterwards while they are deployed, or it's very difficult. So it was very important to have all the details of the requirements. That's a hurdle if you want to make your product, your flexibility product evolving. Second thing is that we figured out that blockchain can have some added value that we have not thought about, like this cross-system operator management. Or also, we figured out that blockchain, well, it could also lead to some new problem, or it will not solve all the disintermediation that we want to achieve, specifically around the metering device. Blockchain, if you put wrong data in it, you will still have wrong data afterwards. It will still only be immutable. But so you still need an external third party, a trusted third party, first to validate the metering device, to certify the metering device, but also to validate the data in case of issue. I think earlier in this presentation of this hub, we have seen that we have still a lot of wrong data uploaded by the different metering devices that we have. I think it was in Australia. It's effectively the case, and it's a real problem for flexibility providers. So blockchain with blockchain, we can, for example, put in place some rules with the smart contract, so we can accelerate this validation, but we cannot solve this if we have a dispute between two players. We still need an external third party. And so we finally achieved this nice architecture of three kind of smart contracts. First one is for the registration of the players. The second one is for the contractual links between the flexibility provider and the flexibility owner. And finally, and this is the most important, the smart contract for the management of the bit, from its introduction to the final settlement of the penalties. And so we are more or less halfway in our project. This is a very crowded slide, but this is kind of our first outcome after this first 6 weeks. So we still need to deploy this smart contract on EWF and test this transaction, this confidential transaction. But we can see that yes, conceptually blockchain can accelerate the settlement process. And it can also facilitate the management of the same flexibility by different system operators. And it can also accelerate the dispute management and can have added value in the validation, but it will not disintermediate all the validation process. You will still need a third party to validate the data, and also you need to have collaboration between the players to agree on the same smart contract. Because at the end, if every system operators will use different smart contracts, well, we'll have no added value for the cross-management of the same flexibility points. Also, yes, the immutability of smart contract might be an issue if you want to make your flexibility product evolve. And finally, also, that's quite interesting, we discussed last week, the validation of the data in the blockchain is variable. So the time for validation is variable. But if you have a fixed lead time, how can you be sure that your bit will be taken into account or not? If you have a congestion on the blockchain, this might lead to some issue. Here we have 45 minutes lead time, so should not be a big problem. But in the future, or if you consider intraday market in Germany with 5-minute lead times, this will be a problem. Also, you can think about new concept like having a lead time not on second, but in blocks. But this needs to be tackled, and this needs to be taken into account when you will develop an application that will run effectively on the blockchain. So the conclusion is that yes, there will be added value, but there is still a long way, and we need to onboard also the other players like the DSO, but obviously the regulators in this journey to effectively unlock this potential of the blockchain. So that's it for me. If you have more questions, feel free. Otherwise, we have a nice website with all our innovative projects, notably around AI, blockchain effectively, and an Internet of Energy concept that has been unveiled yesterday. That's it.
Thank you very much, Loic. Very interesting. And if there aren't any questions from the audience, I definitely do have one or two, but let's first give the opportunity, and in that case, the cube to the audience.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. It was really interesting. I'm working on also on blockchain project myself, and I have a really specific question. I don't know if you can answer. Why did you pick? Why did you decide to do 3 smart contracts?
Well, it's just based on the. Actually, you can think about a lot of different architecture of smart contract. You can have like a tree architecture and so on. What we wanted to have is this immutability, because if you think about Elia as a big player with a big bank account, well, you do not need to bring trust. But we wanted also to envision this project in a sense that we will also use this smart contract for smart grid managers, small microgrid managers. In Belgium, for example, we have a well-known BRP that went bankrupt quite recently. And so you need to think also about these new players. So you need to have immutability. And so if you want immutability, you need to have a reduction of the smart contract, because otherwise you can put some box there and there and adapt it then afterwards. So the idea was this one, that we really we have assessed the value chain of the process from the registration to finally the bid. And so we see that contractual links, well, you could think about it. This is something you will change much less than your bid, for example, because you will bid every day, while the contractual links you might change it every month, and the registration you will do it only once. So it was also one reason why we have only 3 smart contracts.
Yeah. I have a second question, if I'm allowed to.
Go ahead.
So, how have you been integrating consumers in this? If you're talking about flexible loads, have you thought about it? Have you done it already? Have it just been a third party not knowing anything about it?
That's a very good question. I'm having this question also from the management all the time. It's still to be honest, it's still a lab project. So we will still be on computer with a manual activation. We will have some effective activation from the prosumers, from the portfolio of Actility, which is a flexibility provider. But it will just be to show that yes, end-to-end the process work. But it's a very important step that we need to tackle for the next stage, when we will effectively add this IoT device to the prosumer. And we are also running other projects to understand how to incentivize this prosumer, but this is a separated topic. And at the end, the next project will also need to bring this dimension into account.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Somebody who would... The cube goes to the back.
Hi. I think really interesting presentation there. Thank you very much. What I wanted to know is, the more that I read about blockchain, it's more, from a consumer centric.
Yep.
It's more, the use cases are B2C, P2P trading, smart
Yep.
contracts, as you mentioned. What do you see as a B2B perspective for blockchain in utilities and energy? Do you have a few ones that are like, pretty commercial or getting
Yep.
to commercial?
Well, this is actually not only B2C, it's also B2B, and it's B2B2C. It's in the sense that we will deal with flexibility providers. So we want Elia will still remain, as has been presented today, the consumer doesn't care about the settlement of this flexibility. So we will deal with B2B aggregators and so on. So I don't see really this project effectively purely B2C centric. It's effectively targeting more B2B players.
Then apart from smart contracts, what else could be the use cases, here
Yep.
for blockchain?
Yeah, I will come back to one slide, but you can think about many applications. But of course, when you talk about B2B, well, it's a bit less decentralized. So by default, the added value of the blockchain remains not that important, and it's less easy to justify a project on blockchain when you talk purely about B2B. So while I see an added value for B2B, it's more to make the link with the B2C. As in this case, once again, we want to have only one smart contract for both TSO, which are connected at a European level with standardized product, with the DSO, and with also the microgrid manager or even the energy market. So a good example for the B2B sector would be to have just one smart contract for the management of the flexibility for any kind of product, like voltage control, energy market. And this would be, for example, a product that could be useful for the B2B.
Thank you.
The cube is on its way to nobody, it looks like. No further questions from the audience?
Thank you.
Yeah. Still, you were saying you're in the lab, and maybe this, let's pretend that what you are having in the lab will become the standard in the industry. How long would it take to standardize everything and transform the existing system to what you have presented? I think this is something that might be interesting for everybody here, because do we have to include it in the next 3 years in our midterm plannings and investments, or is it another 10 years ahead?
That's a very good question. And I was at the EWF Affiliate Day on Monday, and it's still a big question for everybody around the blockchain. The first question is how to deal with the regulators. They are starting to do that in some country at EWF, but it will take time, and especially with TSO and this kind of all utilities, it will take even more time. I think it can be quite fast, because now, if you go to the EWF stand, you will see some real-life application, like share and charge, for example. They are already running some charging of EV application based on blockchain with stablecoin and so on. So it's effectively running. So from a technology point of view, I think in the next year it would be available, because EWF will be, so EWF, yeah, I didn't mention that, but the blockchain is still on a test environment now, but they want to go live by Q3 2019, which means having really commercial application. But for the regulation point of view, and also for the collaboration point of view, it might take time, because you need to onboard. There will not be any added value of using blockchain from a TSO if you don't have the DSO on board and the regulators, because you will not, and to also if you don't incentivize the consumer to participate to this. So for a TSO perspective, it's more a midterm perspective. For a technology point of view, I think it will be ready next year.
I think the question is regulatory problems, or not the technology. I think the technology is there. I'll give you that. And I think that the other thing is then let's say the costs. I mean, these are transactions, and have you already? And we're talking about small amounts of energy if it comes to smart contracts, especially if it comes to the B2C business. Do you have an objective where the cost should be for every transaction? No. I know they are marginal.
Yeah, they are really marginal, and that's a huge question also. Honestly, I will once again say I don't know, but while discussing with the EWF guy, there is also something that we need to tackle, and it's not clear for us as well, is which kind of money will you use? Will you use token? Will you use like euro? Will you try to use a stable coin? So try to have a stable money, virtual money that is replicating euro. It's not really clear what we can use afterwards. So the goal of this blockchain technology is, of course, to reduce the transaction costs. So I would say lower than now, otherwise we do not put online.
Okay, yeah. So then we're coming back to the 3 questions asked you already. I think blockchain has to answer 3 questions. What does it better, cheaper, and faster than existing technologies? Exactly. It has to be at least cheaper.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very interesting, very enlightening. Yeah, so now this was the end of this session. Unfortunately, the panel will take place because there are no panelists. And talking to me alone would be not really interesting for you. So thank you very much for your attention, being here, and have another rest day, very interesting one. Even maybe having some class at some booth, and hopefully tomorrow will be as interesting as the one was today. Take care and goodbye.